everybody, and welcome back to The Eavesdrop, where you get to be a butterfly on the wall and listen in on my conversations. Today we're sitting here with my daughter, Savannah Van Stee, and she's soon to be Savannah Keeson when she gets married this fall. But the reason I brought Savannah on is because Savannah has ADHD, and she was diagnosed with it as an adult as well. But she has an interesting transition story that will probably ring true with a lot of you as far as that journey of misdiagnosis and frustration, trying to figure out what's going on. To make sure you don't miss out on any great conversations, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Let's get into it. Savannah is a community health worker. She's very passionate about helping others and about being able to be effective and efficient, and she's had some struggles with that. So we're going to hear all about those things. So today I want to introduce Savannah. Savannah, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, tell us a little more if you want.
Yes, I am Savannah. I am Janine's daughter. It's weird to call you by your first name. Let's see. Well, yes, like she said, I am a community health worker at the health department. I work with people, getting people on Medicaid and food assistance and just getting resources in general. So I like to say that I'm just a good person to ask. If you have questions, you don't know who else to ask, because I'll just at least be able to point you in the right direction. Professional problem solver, which is funny because as a child I was a terrible problem solver.
But, you know, it's a common characteristic with people with ADHD is that they are outside the box thinkers, and so they are problem solvers a lot of times. It's really common for people with ADHD to go into helping fields. And I know that is something that you've done and you've really enjoyed.
Yes.
But I want you to tell me a little bit about your journey to where you've gotten now with your ADHD, and how does it affect your job and how does it affect what you do in your everyday life?
Yeah. For sure. When I was 4 years old, was the first time that I was diagnosed with anything, and that's because I was a challenge as a child. I like to say that I was born anxious. I cried all the time. I was just unhappy. When I was very young, I was very scared about leaving the house, all kinds of things. So I always joke that Mom took me to the doctor and she goes, "She broke you, no worky, fix her. I don't know what's wrong with her." And they said, "Oh, she has anxiety, a lot of it too."
This child used to worry about worrying.
Yes. Yeah, that was.
She'd be like, I'm scared that I'm going to be worried.
Yes, exactly. So I wasn't medicated or anything at that point in my life. You guys didn't want to medicate me. I was just taught a lot of coping skills, and I did do some counseling when I was young, but it was mostly just learning patience and trying to figure out how to be okay with living in general. Was particularly difficult when we moved when I was 6 years old. I had a lot of anxiety about that, and it was a big adjustment for me. And then when I was 9, I think was the first time I was tested for ADHD, correct? Mm-hmm. Because
at this point, I was convinced she had ADHD.
Because Mom was a special education teacher, and she knew all the signs and all of the other everything. But at the time, it was very uncommon for girls to get diagnosed with ADHD. I think that's something that a lot of women my age are experiencing these days, is that all of us were diagnosed with anxiety and depression and things like that when we should have been diagnosed with ADHD. Because there was this whole idea that girls didn't have ADHD, and it was just because we presented very differently. I didn't have a lot of hyperactive traits, but I had a lot of difficulty focusing. I had a lot of difficulty applying myself. I was very intelligent, but didn't get assignments done on time, and my teachers always said I was a perfectionist and all these other things. So 9 years old was the first time I was tested. I was not diagnosed at that time. They, I think, again, diagnosed me with just generalized anxiety disorder. Mm-hmm. And then when I was in my early teens, it's hard to say exactly when, was the second time I was tested. And again, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder.
And then they added depression.
And then they added depression. Depression got added when I was 15, I remember.
Yes.
Because I was being bullied. And that was also very difficult on me. So I think a lot of things, as I grew up, ADHD was prevalent, but I didn't know it. And I didn't know why I struggled so hard, or why things were so difficult for me when they seemed so easy for everyone else. So it was difficult socially as well. So when I was 15, I was diagnosed with depression and social anxiety, because socializing was very difficult. I was being bullied, XYZ. I guess as far as diagnosis goes, I from the time I was 15 till present day, I've been in therapy, and talking to professionals and learning how to cope and learning how to function in a society that wasn't made for me to function in it. And
you had to fight hard to get your diagnosis.
I had to fight very hard.
So my son had already gotten his diagnosis. My husband and myself both have our diagnoses. And she still hadn't gotten her diagnosis, yes. Although like everyone else in the family had gotten it. So she was still struggling with even getting the help that she needs.
I started seeing a psychiatrist when I first moved back to Michigan, because I moved to Chicago for 2 years during COVID, which was a nightmare, but we'll get into that another time. When I first moved back to Michigan, I started seeing this psychiatrist who was convinced that the reason I was depressed is because I wasn't sleeping very well. So he put me on trazodone and prazosin because he thought that my nightmares were the reason I didn't sleep well, which I do have very vivid nightmares, but they never stopped with the medication. It never worked. And so he was really focused on treating my depression, and I felt like he wasn't listening to me. And so I saw a new psychiatrist, and I saw her for a long time, who was also convinced that I did not have ADHD. And she was really focused on treating my anxiety and depression. And I eventually had a full meltdown in her office. I came in one day and I was just like, I cannot function at work. I can't do my job. I feel like I'm burning out because I'm working too hard, but I'm not getting anything more done than everybody else, but I'm working just as hard. And so that's when she put me on methylphenidate for the first time. And she said it was for treatment-resistant recurrent major depressive disorder. Because they'd been trying to treat my depression for years and it wasn't working, so they started calling it treatment resistant. And with the methylphenidate, I was suddenly able to function. And it worked for a good long while. And then I finally got to a point, I think it was around the time that you started doing coaching, where I was like, I'm going to get tested again. I had started seeing an ADHD coach myself. I was being told by my therapist and my coach that I likely have ADHD, so I went and got tested for the final time last year. So I was 25 when I officially got diagnosed. Basically what they said is, first of all, they couldn't do an accurate IQ test on me because I'm so bad at math and so good at reading and comprehension. So they said my IQ was basically too high for me to have ADHD, but they also said I wasn't functioning at the level of the IQ that I had. So I was too smart to be struggling as much as I was. Little flex there.
There you go.
But so that's when I got my diagnosis, and that's also around the time that I started seeing a new psychiatrist who I see now, who is our family psychiatrist. And
it sounds crazy, doesn't it? Our family psychiatrist.
But when you have a family like ours, you kind of have to. It's the same as having a family doctor. It's just our family psych. She knows all of us really well. She's validating. She is also.
I like the way that she listens to us about like what our meds are doing for us or not doing for us. She's very conscious of making sure that our meds are good.
And she's not afraid of trying different meds, and she's not afraid of, using a lot of different things at one time to see what kind of works out. And, you know, she experimented a lot with me on what worked and what doesn't. And now I'm on less medication than I was with those other psychiatrists, and I'm doing way better. I'm on a higher dosage of sertraline because I thought sertraline didn't work for me, but that's because they had me on 75 milligrams of it when I was a kid. It wasn't going to do nothing. I'm on 250 now, and I can actually, like, function. Like, but she's also the one who has started to discuss OCD with me.
I've been diagnosed with OCD for a long time because in my diagnosis story, it went depression, anxiety, OCD, and ADHD.
Right.
So the OCD doesn't surprise me at all. What sparked you to say, I really, really, really need to get this diagnosis? What was going on in your life that made you feel like that was something you had to do at that time?
It was mostly work. I started feeling like I needed some kind of accommodation, or what I really needed was the validation. Just knowing that I have this piece of paper from a doctor that says, yes, this person does have ADHD. This person is not making it up. This person has been told several times that they don't have ADHD, but all of the evidence lines up at 25 years old, she does, you know? I didn't end up going for accommodations at work because I realized that I was already kind of accommodating myself, and I didn't need them as bad as I thought I did, but I still struggle with feeling like I don't have ADHD and I'm making it up. And I still think that this is, you know, something I'm making up for attention, or I don't really know. I guess, like, whatever it is the doctors thought forever and ever, the reason I was making it up, you know, all of the things that I struggled with. I never was able to articulate that when I was a kid. I wasn't able to verbalize it as well. And after years of therapy and now coaching, I'm finally able to verbalize the things that I struggle with, and I think that was part of the reason I got the diagnosis, is because I could accurately tell them what was going on.
You've been in therapy for a long time.
Yeah.
Talk therapy. Now you also do ADHD life coaching with one of my colleagues.
Yes.
Not with me, because I won't coach her.
It wouldn't work.
we know better than to do such silly things. So she works with a colleague of mine. I would love for you to tell everybody, because you have a really good perspective, because I understand coaching and how coaching works, but going into it, you didn't understand it. And I remember one time you made the comment that sometimes coaching is harder than therapy.
Yeah. Sometimes I get more out of coaching than I do out of therapy. I love my therapist, and I would never stop doing therapy, just because it's always been so helpful to me to have someone there to talk to and, you know, talk about the emotional stuff and the trauma and all of that. And eventually I'm going to be starting EMDR. But coaching is different because it's helped me come up with my own answers for problems. So things that I'm actively facing and dealing with, I can bring that to a session and be like, I need to solve X problem. And a lot of the times the emotional stuff comes up and the trauma comes up, and you address those feelings as they come, but what you're really focused on is finding a way to cope with ADHD in general, with this symptom that is causing you to do whatever this is. And I think a lot of the reason the emotions come up is because it's like, at this age, I'm starting to realize that it's like, oh my gosh, this thing that I've been struggling with forever is because I have ADHD and because I'm disabled. And it's so weird for me to say that I am disabled, because I work with people who are disabled, and I don't feel like I have the right to say that I'm disabled. But ADHD is disabling.
It is disabling, indeed.
And there's no denying that, you know.
Well, and I remember when you lived in Chicago, and what was your title there?
I was a community support specialist.
So when you were doing that, I remember there were a lot of notes to be written. And
I could not get my notes done.
You couldn't do your notes to save your life.
No, I was always so behind on my notes, and that was because I didn't have a set time that I had to get them done, except for we had to get them done quarterly. So the end of the quarter would come up, and I'd have over 100 notes to write from visits that were months ago, and I would have to just kind of make it up, and I wasn't proud of that because I was a social worker, and these notes needed to be accurate in case, you know, something happened to one of my clients, and the notes needed to be looked back on. I worked with a team, thankfully, so my notes were not the only ones for these clients, but I did really struggle with documentation. Mm-hmm. And since I've been diagnosed and I still have a job that requires a lot of documentation, it's not as difficult now. It is something that I do directly after a client meeting because that's how it's structured. That's how it's expected to be done. With my last job, it was kind of like, well, you know, if you get done with your day, you can go home and do your notes there, or you can do them on the weekend. You can do them whenever you want, and whatever works for you. What works for me is being told that they need to be done by now, which I don't like.
Right. So how has coaching helped you with work?
Coaching has helped me with figuring out how to communicate with my management and how to bring up my concerns and ask questions. And therapy has helped me learn how to be assertive.
When you think about like treatment for your ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
so you take meds.
Mm-hmm.
You have a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
you have a coach,
Mm-hmm. And a psychiatrist.
I
I have a team.
You have a team.
Yes.
Right. Do you think that, so like a lot of times people will say, well, I'm in therapy.
Yes.
Or they'll say, I'm on meds. What are your thoughts on the multimodal approach to ADHD treatment?
You're going to get a lot more done a lot faster. You're going to be able to... Sure, with therapy, you could probably address all the same things that you address in coaching, and you might be able to work through those with the therapist. But I see a coach twice a week, and then I see my therapist once a week, and I see my psychiatrist once a month. With this whole team, I'm able to develop myself and get to where I want to be a lot faster than if I was just working with one person. It's not for everyone. Admittedly, a lot of my time is taken up by treatment
Yeah.
and working on myself. It's a lot of work to put in as much work into myself as I do, and sometimes I forget that, and I'll be like, why am I so exhausted? And my therapist or my coach will have to remind me, well, you are putting a lot of effort into bettering yourself, and I think it's worth it, mostly because for me at my age at 25, no, I'm not 25 anymore, I'm 26. At 26, I'm looking at having kids in the near future. I mean, of course, I'm getting married this year, so it's not going to be like this year, but I want to be able to take care of myself as a mother so that I can teach my children how to take care of themselves and how to function with the disabilities that I'm likely to pass on to them. I mean, my fiance is not diagnosed with ADHD, but
let's leave it there.
He is diagnosed with depression and anxiety.
Yes.
And we joke that our kids are screwed because they're going to end up with a lot of the same mental health problems that we have. But if we can figure out how to cope with that and how to, function with that, then we can teach our children how to. And they won't have to struggle as much as we did.
So that leads me to another question, which is hard for me to ask because I'm sure it wasn't great sometimes. Being raised with a set of parents, two parents who were undiagnosed with ADHD,
and untreated.
Mm-hmm. What was that like?
It was great, and it was difficult at times. I think as with anything, as parents, that's something that I think about a lot, is that we are going to mess up. We are going to make mistakes. The important part is recognizing that you've made those mistakes, being able to apologize for it, being able to communicate about it, and, recognizing that you're not a perfect person, recognizing that your parents aren't perfect people.
Pretty close.
Pretty close.
Very, very close.
Nobody's perfect, and I guess you guys always did your best, but there were things, like I really struggled with emotional dysregulation. Crying a lot and not being able to stop crying. And I mean, if you've ever been in a room with a child who is crying, screaming, crying, sobbing, can't breathe, it gets exhausting. And it's, I don't want to say it's annoying, but it's disturbing, you know? And so I would frequently be sent to my room to cry it out. And I don't necessarily think that was always helpful for me, especially now as an adult. I get very uncomfortable crying in front of other people. I feel like I need to go hide, and I feel like I'm making everybody around me uncomfortable when I do cry.
And then on my side of that, and Dad's side of that was, it would send us into sensory overload.
Exactly.
And we didn't realize that that's what was happening. It was just sensory overload. We just couldn't take it anymore. And it was like, we knew that it was probably safer to do that, because, you know, when you go into that sensory overload, it's just like, you need to go someplace else and do this, because it's just not good to be here right now, right?
Exactly.
But I wish I would have handled it differently. I didn't know what was going on. I thought I was teaching you to self-soothe.
Right.
But it was also a matter of, you know, like, I remember your dad and I, even though we didn't know we had ADHD, we both knew that we felt emotions pretty deeply and pretty strongly. And without ever making an actual verbal agreement, it was always, if one of us was getting overstimulated or starting to feel that pressure build up, it was time to hand the kids off and walk away. But that was, you know, you think about, if we'd have known we had ADHD, we might have realized that we were hyperstimulated, that we were, you know, having other issues. So I do know that it was less than ideal at times.
Yeah, of course. But, I mean, the same can be said, you know, I'm sure my children will say the same things when I'm, you know, your age and my kids are my age. They're going to tell me all about how I screwed up, and I'm just going to have to be like, yeah, you're right, and I'm sorry, I did my best, and that's all you can do as a parent. Nobody is expecting you to be a perfect parent.
Now, once we did get the ADHD diagnosis, or not the ADHD, but the anxiety diagnosis, I remember we started working then on coping with those feelings. I think we did more with visualization and meditation. Once I realized that you were suffering from anxiety, we approached it differently too.
Yeah, I remember sleeping was always very difficult for me. So there were, you know, I had to sleep with the door open because I needed to be able to get out, and I needed to be able to see in the hallway. I had to sleep with the radio on because I needed the white noise and I needed something to distract my mind. Some nights I would just stay up a little bit later because it's really hard to sleep when you're having that kind of anxiety and you just can't, you know, relax. I remember too, you know, I'll be honest, I had a lot of bathroom anxiety. And it was...
That's what started the whole thing, is I couldn't take you away from the
awful.
house because you would be afraid you were going to
have an accident.
I couldn't get you more than a half hour from the house.
Right. And I wasn't a kid that had accidents frequently anyway. I just was so worried about it.
So then I took you to the doctor thinking, is there something wrong with her bladder that she always feels like she needs to go to the bathroom, or what's going on here? And
I had a very anxious bladder.
Yeah.
So I eventually ended up with a room that had a bathroom attached to it at our first house in Lawrence. And that was actually really nice for me because I felt safe knowing that if I had to get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom, it was right there. I didn't have to go into a dark, scary hallway. I didn't have to, you know, go downstairs. And we
left the light on in the bathroom, didn't we?
Because I was scared of the dark too. I was very scared of the dark. And a lot of these things, you know, I grew out of as I got older.
Oh, you were such a fun child.
Oh, I was a handful. I was a handful, and I know it.
But here's one thing that I want to know if you agree with, is that a lot of times, even though, you know, emotions would run high, or, you know, things wouldn't be perfect. And I think you had a pretty good childhood, and I think you do too.
I had a great childhood.
But I feel like there was really a lot of laughter.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, your dad and I are kooky.
Yeah. For lack of a better term, correct.
And I think that, you know, like, a lot of times people with ADHD have a different sense of humor. And we all kind of had that same sense of humor, and I feel like we laughed a lot
Yes.
when you guys were here.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I was also very lucky to have an older brother who I was very close with. You know, I know you say that we didn't always get along when we were really little, but I don't remember that. I always remember my brother being my best friend, my protector, and, you know, having him there made a lot of things easier, especially because he was dealing with a lot of the same things that I was, and we didn't really necessarily understand what that was, but I always felt like our family was very tight-knit, and I always, I remember my friends would get mad at me when I was a kid because I would want to hang out with my mom, and I wouldn't want to hang out with them. My best friend lived across the street from me, and she would ask me to come over, and I'd be like, I kind of want to hang out with my mom. And she would get mad, rightfully so, you know, like, because I live with my mom, and she wanted to hang out with me all the time, but I was like, I don't want to go. And I think a lot of that, too, was the social anxiety and the social overwhelm and wanting to be able to be in a place that's safe. I always felt very safe at home. I always felt very safe around you guys. No conversation was too big or too scary. Now, I mean, I didn't tell you guys everything, but...
Thank God.
Wouldn't that have been awful?
Oh my God, I want to know everything.
But yeah, our family was always very tight-knit. And then I do remember it got harder when Nate moved out. Because when I was a freshman in high school, he was a senior. So my sophomore year, he moved out and went to college. And that was difficult in a different way because all of a sudden I didn't have that ally. I had you guys, but you guys were dealing with a lot of other stuff too. And I was also struggling a lot with my friendships, but I was lucky enough that around that time is when I met my fiance, and I was able to really rely on him, and he was a very safe person for me. We were always there for each other, still are. But I remember it being difficult when Nate moved out, too.
So knowing that you had possibility of having ADHD.
I was on Adderall for like a week when I was 12.
Right.
Hated it.
You struggled a lot with bullying, and it was real bullying, which is really common with kids with ADHD.
Really?
And I think, like, there's so many things about ADHD that people don't realize. And once you get diagnosed and you really start looking into it, you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. Okay, now I get it. But for people with ADHD, it's not uncommon to be bullied because we do feel different. And
we act
different. And we are a little bit different. And a lot of times we're an easy target, and we become the joke of the group, you know, and they really think that they like you, you know, but they don't always treat you that way. And then sometimes they just don't like you and find you annoying. I had somebody tell me one time, not everybody with ADHD is annoying. And my thought was, not all the time.
Not all the time.
But at some point, they've been very annoying. So we are kind of set up to be.
Yes. And I think, too, with the bullying, something that played a big role in that, why I stuck with that friend group for so long, was the RSD.
Yeah.
I was really scared
of that rejection.
Of leaving that friend group because I'd been with them for so long. They had always been my friends. And I was scared of trying to make new friends. And I was scared of the bullying getting worse because of leaving the group. I was also scared because you were friends with their moms, some of them. There was a lot to be afraid of in school, which you shouldn't be afraid at school, but...
No. But with the RSD, you know, that whole thing with... It turns us into people pleasers, right?
Yeah.
You know, because
Chronic,
we
and
don't
it's
want
bad.
anybody to reject us in any way.
Yep.
And so...
Makes boundary setting very difficult.
Makes boundary setting really difficult. And
Being assertive.
I know that aspect of ADHD, even though it's not part of the definition, you know why it's not part of the definition, right?
No, I don't.
So... when they first started looking at ADHD and looking at it as a disorder, they recognized the emotional regulation portion of it as being part of ADHD. But when they started writing the definitions for mental disorders, and at the time I don't remember what it was called. It was a different name, but it was, essentially ADHD.
Yeah. Hyperactive child disorder or something.
Yeah, you couldn't quantify emotion.
Right.
So you can't measure
Right.
emotions, so
Right.
you can't put it as a criteria because you can't measure it.
Yep, that makes sense.
And so for about 50 years, they just ignored it.
Yeah.
And over probably the last 10 to 15 years, it's really started to be recognized as, hey, we kind of forgot about this whole component here.
Right.
And so the RSD is part of that component. And I'm just, as a matter of fact, I have a client that I'm going to start working with soon who was actually diagnosed with RSD along with their ADHD.
Really?
Which was the first time I'd ever heard that.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting to me. And for those of you who don't know what RSD is, you can check out my video about RSD.
Stands for rejection sensitive dysphoria. That fear of rejection, basically.
Yeah, and it's painful and debilitating.
And I still experience it as an adult at work. In my personal life, I haven't told you this yet. We had a situation with one of our groomsmen. The side eye you're giving me. I basically was feeling as though some of the people in our bridal party were not treating this as an important event. They were not making us a priority. Specifically, some of Jack's groomsmen were not making him a priority, and that was very hurtful to me because he deserves better, and he is a good person, and he deserves to have good friends who show up for him. And so I wanted to completely go off on all of them and just tear them a new one. Bailey, thankfully, calmed me down, and she helped me write out a well-worded message that just basically laid it out and said, hey, this is what I'm feeling. These are the expectations. These are the boundaries. This is what I am expecting from you guys. If you can't meet the expectations of being in my bridal party, then I need to know now so I can make other arrangements. We did have a groomsman step forward and say that he cannot commit to what we are asking. And they are still coming to the wedding, and they are still going to attend and be a guest. But I remember after sending that message, I was so scared of what people were going to think of me. If people were going to think that I was a massive bitch, that I was asking too much, that I was being a bridezilla. That was really what I was concerned about. And then I realized that if people think that, then I don't want them at my party anyway. But I did really struggle with wondering what that kind of backlash was going to look like.
So but I remember a time when you wouldn't have been able to do that. Do you think that that's therapy and coaching? What do you think that is?
That's some knowledge that I've learned about myself. Because I remember I was talking to Nate and Bailey about it, and I was very upset. I was crying. I was stressed out. I was angry. And I said, this is what I need to do. I need to say something. I need to lay it all out. I need to communicate this. And they're like, that's great. You should probably sleep on it and do it tomorrow. And I said, no, because if I don't do it right now, if I don't do it tonight, I'm not going to. Basically, I will, once the anger wears off, once the hurt wears off, I will chicken out, and I will allow myself to people please and allow them to continue to walk all over us. And
where'd you learn that?
Years and years and years of experience, knowing that, and still doing that to this day. Now, the hard thing is that when I'm in that emotional state is when I have to do that, but you shouldn't write that kind of thing in an emotional state.
But so what did you do? Because you knew that you shouldn't write it in an emotional state, but you knew you wouldn't write it if you didn't. So what did you do to compensate?
Recruited my sister-in-law, who is also my maid of honor and one of my best friends. Recruiting the help was what was really important to me because I knew I couldn't do it alone. And I knew I had someone there who would help.
So don't you feel like being able to recognize where you can, being able to recognize where you struggle and being able to know when and where to go for help are really important.
Yes, absolutely. And being able to ask for help and, you know, knowing who you can ask for help.
Right. And it's hard to ask for help.
Yeah.
Because we both spent our entire lives coming up with these coping mechanisms or these strategies or these things.
Learning how to help ourselves and how to do it ourselves.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that has been freeing for me is being able to say, I kind of suck at this.
Right. Exactly. No, and that's
I
just
could use some help and be able to say, I'm not stupid. It's just that my brain doesn't work that way.
Right.
If I couldn't build a house, it wouldn't mean I was stupid. It would mean that I don't have that skill. And so if somebody else has that skill and can help me, then I have to be able to ask for that help. And that was one of the, it was a difficult thing for me to learn.
Well, and sometimes too, it's important recognizing just like when you need that help, because I can write that kind of message myself for a friend. If Bailey had been in that situation and she was crying and angry and needed to write that message right now, I would have been able to help her do that. I would have been able to do the legwork. But because I was in that kind of emotional state, I couldn't do it for myself.
And that's part of knowing yourself.
Yeah.
And I do keep bringing it back to coaching because that's one of the great things about coaching is you get to know yourself better.
Yep, a better understanding of myself. That's what I'm constant. They're always asking, what am I hoping to get out of this session, or what am I hoping to get out of coaching? And overall, generally, it's just a better understanding of myself is what I'm looking for.
What does a better understanding of yourself give you?
A lot of power, honestly. It gives me the knowledge to know how I'm going to react to a situation and how I can react to my reaction. And how quickly you can do that too. Isn't it amazing once you put a strategy in place and you use it frequently enough and it just becomes so automatic. Right. Knowing what your triggers are and knowing how to cope with that, and
being like, oh, I'm triggered. Oh, I know my next step.
Right. But yeah, being able to just say, I just got triggered, or this is going to be triggering for me. And that's something that I deal with a lot in work too, because, I deal with a lot of very traumatic situations, people dealing with very deep, heavy, difficult topics. Poverty, and secondhand trauma is a real thing. It's not as intense as the firsthand trauma, but when you're taking on all of that kind of trauma several times a day, different kinds of trauma, and you're holding that for people and sitting in it, that is triggering. And we have a very anxious dog here. He's panting a lot and kind of all up in our business, so
if you hear him, I apologize.
Yeah. But yeah, coping with holding that kind of trauma, and it's something that I still have, I still struggle deeply with, and acknowledging that I am burnt out, and trying to figure out what to do about that burnout. And unfortunately, I have come to the decision that I think I need to take a step back from client-facing interactions. I need to take a step back from holding all of that trauma for everyone. Now, does that mean that I'm not going to be in a helping profession anymore? Absolutely not. I don't think I would feel fulfilled in, like, an accounting job. I think I would kind of hate that. But I think I want to move more upstream and focus more on how to solve the big problems as opposed to just taking babies out of the river, I should probably explain that analogy.
Yeah, you should.
So there's the analogy that this group of people are walking down the river and they see a baby in the river and they're like, oh my gosh, there's this baby in the river, we got to get the baby out of the river. So they start pulling the baby out of the river, and then there's another baby coming down the river and they're like, oh my gosh, we got to get this baby out of the river. And everybody's pulling babies out of the river. The babies keep coming and they keep pulling the babies out of the river, and nobody stops to think to go upstream and see who's putting babies in the gosh darn river. And that's kind of what it's like working in public service. We're constantly taking babies out of the river and trying to help people. But we need to go upstream and figure out who's putting babies in the river and figure out how to stop putting babies in the river, how to keep poor people out of the system, and how to stop poverty, basically. It's a big ask, but...
Well, and I feel like, we both spent a lot of time in public service, and there still has to be somebody to pull the baby out.
Absolutely, there
right?
absolutely does.
And for a long time, I was that person pulling the baby out, too. And I feel like it's one of those things that you can only do for a certain amount of time.
Yeah. And I think, too, when I talk about moving away from client-facing interactions, I don't mean permanently. I mean, I need a break. I would like to trade jobs and move upstream for a little bit. Does that mean I'm never going to move back downstream? No. It just means that, and that's the thing, too, with the ADHD, constantly switching between positions. I've been in this position for 2 years now, and I'm getting very frustrated with being and doing the same thing every day. And, I wouldn't say I'm bored, because public service is never boring. But I am stuck, and I need something new, and I need something interesting to reignite that passion, because right now I'm just kind of jaded.
And because you have ADHD, you always strive for something new and exciting anyway.
Exactly.
Or if you did like your job, it might take longer, but I think eventually you would want to change jobs just surely because the novelty is worn off.
Yeah.
I think the longest I ever stayed in a position was 8 years.
Right. Yeah.
So
this is the longest I've ever been in this position, and it's been 2 years.
Yeah, and it is a lot, because a lot of people with ADHD go into service. And a lot of people with ADHD burn out way before their peers do. Yeah. And that's part of that emotional regulation thing, though, too, because we feel everything so deeply, right? And they can't measure that, so they can't prove that we do. Right. But, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there that says we do. Yes. And so you feel those things on that level all day long, day after day after day, and it starts to wear away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think with being a person who has RSD, you are also, not only are you affected by it, but you also recognize it in other people and are hypervigilant for that too. And so then you have another layer. So, and it's not just RSD, but anything. You are able to recognize in other people when they struggle. Yes. Right? Yes. And are you a fixer? Because I'm a fixer.
Jack and I were just talking about that on the way here, because I was saying I could feel that he was feeling off. Remember how we were talking about he's got a little bit of a hangover this morning. He's kind of tired, hadn't had coffee yet, and I could feel his energy was off. And I immediately always just assume it's about me and assume that I have done something, and I feel like I need to fix it. And then I looked at him and I was like, this has nothing to do with me, first of all. Second of all, I can't fix a hangover.
I went through 25, 26 years of my career not knowing I had ADHD. And you said something earlier that just really struck me, because it's the exact same way I felt as far as I looked around and I couldn't figure out why it was so much easier for everybody else, right? Because I was successful. I was a very successful person.
I'm intelligent. I'm successful. I'm able to do these things.
And why is everybody else making it look so darn easy?
Why is it so hard? Because it just seems like it's so much harder for me than it is for everybody else. Why can't I just function? What is wrong with me?
Because it is so much harder.
But then you start having these conversations with yourself, like, what is wrong with you? Why can't you do this? Why are you so messed up? Are you lazy? Are you, and that's, lazy and irresponsible are two words that live rent-free in my head. And it's very difficult still to shut those down.
Do you think that part of that might... What do you think the connection between that and the idea that you still feel like you're an imposter a little bit?
Yeah.
What do you think that connection is? Because do you think if you were able to accept the fact that you truly do have ADHD, that it would affect the way you speak negatively to yourself about things?
Probably. And that's something that I work on a lot, is the way that I talk to myself and the way that, I recognize that I have a disability and that's why I act the way I do. And I'm not lazy. I'm not irresponsible. I have ADHD and it is disabling.
Yeah, you have a hard time believing that.
Right, exactly. And I think a part of that is because most of my young life, I was told I was lazy. I was told I was irresponsible. I was told that I didn't apply myself. I have noticed as I get older and as I've gotten diagnosed that I experience more hyperactive traits. Things like not being able to sit still, fidgeting, all of that, right? But more so just in the way I spend my time. I have a full-time job. I'm a dance teacher. I'm a color guard coach. I have a private dance student that I teach sometimes. I'm planning a wedding. I babysit my nephew on every Tuesday. I fill up all my time doing things because if I sit still for too long, I will feel physically nauseous.
Well, and I don't know about you, but I know that when I'm sitting still in a meeting or trying to hold all of that tension, that hyperactivity in, and I know you've talked a little bit about, after you got your diagnosis, you felt like your symptoms got worse.
Yeah.
But part of that was letting them go.
Yeah.
But I would build up to anger and almost even rage, holding those in.
Right. And I feel like the diagnosis has given me the freedom a little bit to unmask, because now I have a reason for the way that I want to act, why I want to act this way, as opposed to before I'd be like, why do I want to act like an absolute nuisance? I want to act like an absolute nuisance because I have ADHD and I am a nuisance sometimes, but that's just part of my personality and it's just part of who I am, and the people who matter don't mind and the people who mind don't matter.
I like that. Yeah, I know. I think after I got my ADHD diagnosis, there were some things that I kind of let go a little bit. Things where I would beat myself hard for, you lost your phone 6 times today.
Oh, and I
You're
still get
such an
so
idiot,
frustrated about that.
Being able to give myself the grace to say, it's not a personality flaw. It's something with your brain where you have a hard time keeping track of that stuff.
Right.
So giving myself the grace to be able to not say that. And, let's be honest, maybe a little bit of letting go and being okay with losing my phone a few times.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. And not being so hard on yourself about it.
Or fidgeting through a meeting or doing those things because there's a reason.
I work with my dad.
She does.
And we've been in a couple of meetings and people have pointed out to us that it's funny that both of us cannot sit still in a meeting. He will jiggle his legs so bad that it's making the entire table squeak, and he doesn't even notice it's happening. Everybody else around him does, though. And I'm doing the same thing. So people are like, you're definitely your father's daughter. And I'm like, yeah, we both have ADHD.
I literally had a really good friend that I taught with years ago who we would go to conferences together, and she finally just couldn't sit next to me anymore because I move so much. There would have to be a chair between us.
I went to a conference the past 2 days, and I know myself, so I brought several different fidgets. And it was kind of funny because I brought them for my friend who also has ADHD. And so we're pulling our fidgets out of our bag and messing with them, and the people at our table are like, oh, that's such a good idea. I should have done that. And I'm like, yeah, well, never mind. I'm not sharing.
It's funny. I used to use putty a lot.
Oh, yep. I have some putty that I use at work.
And my putty mass would get smaller because people would be like, can I just have a little bit of that putty?
Yeah.
And, it's so it does... It's not only ADHD people who struggle with sitting still, but where the difference comes in is for us, it's almost physically painful. I mean,
Yeah.
in like other people,
Like
I'm bored, like mind-numbingly bored or
Yeah.
whatever. And so they're doing something with their hands, they're fidgeting. And where for me, I feel like it's almost like I need to fidget or I need to move or I need to do something, or I will explode
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yes, exactly. I feel physically nauseated. When I say that I get nauseous, I literally mean that, like, I feel like I'm going to throw up when I'm sitting still like that for too long. And that's why conferences and meetings can be so hard. And I tend to go and take a lot of breaks. I tend to go for walks. I tend to miss a lot of things, actually, because I can't sit there. Or sometimes I'll stand at the back of the auditorium and pace a little bit or rock or something and do my best to pay attention, because I'll also just start to fall asleep. And it doesn't matter how well rested I am. I will just start to get drowsy.
Yeah, I will too. I'll shut down. We've covered a lot today.
You sure have.
We've covered a lot. And I always love having conversations with Savannah. She and I have some of the best conversations around. And I think we're very much alike. And we're just different enough that we even each other out really well. So I just want to say thank you, Savannah, so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
I'm
It's been
so
a
glad
blast.
that you were able to share your story and be honest with me about things. It's not always easy,
No.
and we don't want to just show the bright sides of everything all the time.
Oh, and I could get into that too. People always think, they get this idea that ADHD is just, it's funny, it's cute, you're kind of scatterbrained or whatever. It's so frustrating to be this way. I don't want to be this way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is funny, sometimes it is cute, but most of the time,
Well, and I
it's
think
disabling.
funny and cute is a coping mechanism.
Yeah, exactly. Being able to laugh at it and being able to...
I mean, like when I say I lost my phone 6 times and I laugh about it, I'm also really frustrated about
Yes. I'll walk around the house and Bailey, poor Bailey, she'll see me. I'll be like, I lost my phone again. And she's like, why am I not surprised? Because it's so freaking frustrating.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for being on, and I'm
Yes.
hoping you will be back again.
Of course.
Because we have great conversations, and I think people will enjoy listening to them. And for those of you who enjoyed our conversation and enjoy my content, hit that like button and hit that subscribe button, and we will see you next time.